Okay, we've got 140 and the new entrants are slowing down, so we might get started, will we?
Yes.
Welcome everyone. We're just so pleased to be back on the horse again, a slightly different horse, fortunately, and we're really pleased that so many of you have signed up to join us today. I think most of you know me by now. I'm Penny Hackett and I'm the President of Dying with Dignity New South Wales. I'll just start with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I'm on Camaragal land right now, and I'd like to pay our respects to elders past and present and emerging, and also extend that respect to other First Nations people, including those in the audience today. A few Zoom housekeeping matters. Some of you will have been to our previous sessions and you'll notice that we're using a slightly different format to the way we've normally done things. We've previously done a town hall style meeting where we can all see each other. We're taking this option now a little bit more formal, and you'll only see the panelists on the screen, which are myself, Shayne Higson, Alex Greenwich, and Heath Reid, who's riding shotgun on the technical issues. It is a little bit more impersonal, but it does make it easier for us to show the slides that we've prepared, and we've got quite a lot to talk to you about. There's a Q&A button down the bottom of your screen, and we'd really love you to put some questions in there. We'll get to as many of them as we can at the end, and there's also a chat panel down there which you can just comment along the way, and you can even put questions in there as well. Now, we are recording the session. We'll circulate the link after the event and pop it in our YouTube channel. What we're aiming to do today is to just let you know what happens next with the VAD law. It's passed, but it doesn't come into effect until November next year. So we want to give you an idea of how that process will unfold, and also the plans that Dying with Dignity have for the next couple of years. Now that the law's passed, you may well be wondering what we're going to do with ourselves in a post-VAD world. And the answer is there's a lot of work for us to do. We've undertaken a very detailed strategy review, and the aim of that was to plot out how best we can support the VAD regime and make the most of our time and resources. Regime doesn't come into effect until November in 2023, and we know that many people are disappointed about that. Ideally, it would have come into effect earlier, but there's a lot of planning and implementation required. The regime has to operate in accordance with the Act, and as most of you will know, it's a very technical regime, and both patients and practitioners really need to be prepared for it and understand how it works, and we don't want any mistakes. It's been implemented in other states, and we're learning in New South Wales from the things that have gone well and the things that have gone badly in other states, and we want it to be as accessible and easy to navigate as possible for everyone involved. As part of our strategic review, it became clear that we needed to change our structure a little bit, and I'm just so delighted to announce that Shayne Higson has been appointed as our Chief Executive Officer to help implement our plan for the next few years. Most of you will know that Shayne has been one of the key figures in the VAD movement in Australia. Her efforts just played a critical role in getting VAD before New South Wales Parliament, and she's got incredible depth of knowledge. Plus, she's now a battle-hardened activist, and she's well prepared for what lies ahead for us over the next few years. We owe her a great debt of gratitude for her work in the past. She's just been so committed and spent so much time on it since 2011, really. Shayne might tell me I've got that date wrong, but it's just been a huge commitment to the cause, and we're so pleased that she's taking on this new role. Also, just want to let you know that we've got 2 new board members. So Heath Reid, who's on the screen, our IT legend, and also Stephanie Short, who has been a physiotherapist, but also a professor at Sydney Uni in the health faculty. She's presently in Bulgaria, I think, but she's going to really be able to help us access some groups that we might not otherwise be able to contact. And Heath, who some of you may know from being our community campaign organiser in 2021, Heath is now closely involved with the primary health networks, and that's going to be a fantastic resource for us because we're going to need to involve an awful lot of stakeholder groups. Just an introduction to what we're going to be covering. Shayne will give a recap of where things are now at with the VAD bill. Alex Greenwich, who was the instigator of the New South Wales VAD bill, and we worked incredibly closely with him over an extended period. He's had a bit of a holiday, hopefully recharged his batteries. He'll give us a bit of an insight on the VAD law and particularly its implications for the territories and for future reform, and also some insights into how we can work to make sure that the law is not amended in the future or watered down. And I would just make a general comment about politics generally. I think Alex is an exemplar of the benefits that independent MPs can bring to the political process, and this bill would not have happened without him. So Shayne will then go on to just give an overview of how accessing VAD in New South Wales might work and the process that the New South Wales Health Department are undertaking at the moment for implementing it. After that, I'll give an overview of our new strategy so you can get a feel for what we're going to be doing for the next couple of years and how we plan to go about that. After that, we'll see if we can address as many questions as possible. So without any delay, I'll just hand over to Shayne.
Thanks, Penny, just driving the slides as well. Well, as you know, it's just 3 months since New South Wales became the last state to pass voluntary assisted dying. And this is the first webinar that the organisation has held since it passed. But we don't want to spend too much time reflecting on that campaign, mainly because most of you here today were active participants in that campaign, and also because we want to look forward, as Penny said, and focus on what it means for people who may need to access the law, and also what it means for Dying with Dignity, our change of direction after lobbying for 50 years for this law reform. But we can't let this opportunity go by without thanking some of the people involved in the campaign. Let me start with all of you, our dedicated, passionate supporters and members. Even if you didn't stand with Penny and I and others in front of Parliament House late last year or early this year, you may have contributed in another way. We've had members and supporters donate, volunteer on the community stalls, emailing MPs, writing letters to the editor. So no matter what you did through the campaign, we just want to say thank you, and we couldn't have reached our goal without you. I'd also like to thank the directors of Dying with Dignity, past and present. I think that we're really lucky as a organisation to have such a dedicated group of directors, and I'd like to name the current directors and thank them, of course. Liz Jacker, Jeff Usher, Fiona Jackson, Dee Johnson, Debbie Ditchfield, Julie Hanley, David Piper, Jan Edwards, our new member Stephanie Short, and Heath Reid. And although she died before seeing our New South Wales law pass, the late Judith Daly. And although they are not on the board, I'd also like to acknowledge the contribution of Carmel Malloy from the Non-Profit Alliance, and also our admin person, Sandy Steep. We'd also like to thank Andrew Denton and the team at Go Gentle, which includes Steve Offner, Kiki Paul, Frankie Bennett, and Renee Titmarsh. Go Gentle joined us late in the campaign because they were obviously extremely busy, involved with the other interstate campaigns. But I must say it was just so fantastic to have them at the pointy end of the debate for help. And of course, we had help from Essential Media, Peter Stahl and Amelia Brock, and of course all the co-sponsors. But I've left Penny Hackett till last, our president, because I really want to stress how lucky we were to have someone like Penny leading this organisation over the past 5 years. Penny put in an enormous effort, putting her working life, she did still keep going a little bit of work, but she can't have done too much. She put her working life and her personal life on hold to leave no stone unturned. And, many people might not realise, but she also helped the interstate Dying with Dignities. And although we knew that by helping them, it would help us reach our goal, she really did go above and beyond. So enormous thanks to Penny. And I got distracted and not passed on to the next slide. There's a photograph of Alex and many of our board members. That Field of Hearts was obviously when COVID meant that we couldn't have a rally. So that was a great success. Thank you, everybody, for sending in messages. This is the crew, Penny and I, with Steve Offner, Kiki Paul and Frankie Bennett. And I wanted to use this photo of Penny to give me the opportunity to also thank the other woman in the shot, who is Kathy Barry. Kathy was just one of many advocates who shared her story. And I wish I could name all of you. I'm sure there's lots of you watching, but unfortunately we just don't have time. But Kathy and her partner Martin travelled down from Ballina not once or twice, but a number of times to give evidence. Kathy gave evidence at the parliamentary inquiry. She came back for the rallies, for press conferences, and I'm really pleased that she was able to be there at the end. And as I said, I'm sorry that I can't mention the others. So now to the person we really need to thank more than anyone else for getting this law reform done, and particularly for getting it done in this term of Parliament. And that, of course, is our guest today, Alex Greenwich, the independent member for Sydney. By the end of 2020, after we'd been running our grassroots campaign for 2 years, we really needed to have sort of a glimmer of hope. And Alex Greenwich was our knight in shining armour, because in December 2020, he announced publicly that he would begin the process of drafting legislation in order to introduce voluntary assisted dying legislation in this term of Parliament. By making that announcement in December, he gave his colleagues in Parliament the chance to consider this law reform and consider their positions on the issue. And when Parliament resumed in early 21, he began having conversations with his, we've got a picture of Alex, having conversations with his colleagues, and we continued our lobbying. And throughout the whole process, Alex kept all his promises. He released the draft legislation when he said he would. He consulted key stakeholders, and all the while keeping Dying with Dignity fully informed about the progress. And like Penny, I could not be more impressed by Alex as a politician. He was patient, intelligent, respectful, optimistic, which is really important. And despite having many demands on his time, I'm sure, he made us feel like we were the most important people that he was dealing with, and that voluntary assisted dying was the most important issue he was dealing with. So before I pass over to come back to explain when and how the law can come into effect, I'm happy and pleased to pass on to Alex Greenwich.
Oh, thank you so much, Shayne and Penny and Heath. That was a really warm and generous introduction. And to everybody who is joining this Zoom and the whole grassroots community of Dying with Dignity, you all achieved this. This was an amazing effort where everybody threw everything they had to get the reform through. For me, this was, obviously one of the most important reforms I've dealt with, and we know how it impacts people's lives and people's deaths. It was obviously a really tough process, particularly the strain that the pandemic put on the delays throughout it, and obviously some of the usual New South Wales political changes that regularly happen. But I really appreciated and greatly respect the focus that Dying with Dignity had in getting it done, in holding me to account, in our regular weekly catch-ups, which we did for well over a year, as we ticked everything off. And we really left no stone unturned when it came to achieving this reform. And that was evident by the strong result we got, which was a convincing majority in both houses, and no hostile amendments being passed, despite thousands being drafted. So thank you all for your support and encouragement and determination to get this through. I know that the New South Wales experience has obviously inspired some international campaigns. I was recently over in the UK and met with their team there, who watched our process here very closely, and I was able to basically share the excellent work of Dying with Dignity with them. We also were the key domino that fell for the Territory's rights legislation as well. Once New South Wales, the most popular and arguably the most important state, legislated for voluntary assisted dying, it just was cruel and unfair, even more cruel and unfair, that the ACT in the Northern Territory, where the campaign for reform really started, were unable to legislate despite their parliaments or their legislators having a clear majority in support of reform. So that obviously interacted with the federal election quite a bit. David Pocock in ACT really drove hard on the Territory's rights campaign and was successful. And we obviously know that the now Albanese government had committed to allowing the private members bill on the issue, which has now passed. So the Territories will now begin the process of drafting their own legislation, and then very soon everybody in Australia will have access to voluntary assisted dying. Every state and every territory will have different models, so it is going to be important that there is a COAG process to make sure that there is some national consistency in legislation. There are some aspects of our bill which are better than other states, and there are obviously some states and territories which are stronger than ours in some aspects. And I could see early on there was a question about the moving the 6 months to 12 months. That's something that I obviously strongly support, and hopefully through a process of achieving national consistency with legislations, review of the legislation, that is something that hopefully a future parliament will be able to deliver on. And I'll obviously work closely with the ACT government and the Northern Territory government on any assistance they need with drafting. We've got really good legislation in terms of we really worked hard to prevent any new barriers from coming into place. And this was sort of the one thing that Penny and Shayne and Andrew Denton and the team at Go Gentle and I would discuss on a weekly basis. We didn't want any additional barriers. So we're able to deal with no new barriers in terms of, say, a psychiatric assessment, a palliative care assessment, by just creating guidelines for when those assessments are appropriate. And that's something that health will obviously be working on as they deal with the implementation. But just as the work of Dying with Dignity continues, obviously from a political and legislative perspective, the work on voluntary assisted dying also needs to continue in New South Wales. We have an election in 6 months. We need to make sure that defenders of the legislation are returned and elected to our parliament. Laws are made by a majority of members passing them, and we need to make sure that protections in the voluntary assisted dying bill are in no way whittled away. The best way to do that is to make sure there are strong commitments from the major parties that they won't touch the bill, they won't add any barriers to the reform, and that they will respect the views of the people of New South Wales in protecting the legislation. But it also means that you need to make sure you're electing champions of reform. We had more co-sponsors of this bill than any other legislation in Australian parliamentary history. So there were some 28 co-sponsors of the legislation. A few of those have already left. David Shoebridge is obviously in the federal Senate. Trevor Khan, MLC, is now a judge. And there may very well be others that are either not elected or are retiring at this election. There are also people who supporters their seat may go to someone who's opposed to the bill. And, we know that lots of MPs are putting their hands up now to say they're retiring. And a number of those, people like Victor Dominello and Chris Galuptis were strong supporters of the reform always. So it's going to be important that that supporters of the bill in a majority are returned in the next Parliament. And that's going to be important work for Dying with Dignity to do. And I was thinking today, probably one thing to add to your list, Shayne and Penny, is to still do an election forum ahead of the 2023 election to get representatives of all the major parties, potentially who were co-sponsors, to get strong commitments to them. We also know that as a result of the legislation passing, a massive increase in palliative care funding was legislated. Some $750 million in additional palliative care funding, which is particularly important for people in rural and regional areas. So New South Wales has gone from a state where, you know, there was obviously a need to increase funding for palliative care, a state which didn't have voluntary assisted dying, to now a state where, you know, it's probably going to be a good place to die in New South Wales. And I think that's something that we should be proud of and be honest about. And the reform was a really important one for our Parliament. It was an honest debate for our Parliament, and one which was largely held very respectfully. So I look forward to continuing to work with Dying with Dignity to protect and ensure the integrity of the legislation when it is enacted, to make sure that we have a majority in Parliament who are still supportive of the reform and can be looking to improvements to the reform as well as part of the legislative review process that occurs with it. It's also important to note that there are a number of areas of regulation which are the responsibility of both the Health Minister and the Attorney General. It's going to be important that we get commitments from the government and opposition, or the coalition and Labor Health and Attorney General people, to make sure that they will also respect the legislation. The Attorney General and the Health Minister, for example, appoint the Voluntary Assisted Dying Board, which has an ultimate, the ultimate sort of final sign-off. So, so getting strong commitments from the parties, protecting the legislation in its current form, and helping the other territories now legislate and achieve a national consistency, I think, are some of the key things to do. So I know that for many people on this webinar, probably, voluntary assisted dying may have been one of the things that, that really got you engaged in politics. And you learned a lot about advocacy, and you're all extremely successful at it. So continue to use those skills, both with this reform, but also in other important reforms for your local communities and for our state as a whole. So thank you all so much. I have to say it was really an honor and a privilege to work with the Dying with Dignity team and the collaboration which ultimately achieved the reform. So thank you all. It was really a highlight of my career, and one where I also certainly learnt a lot. So thank you all. But I guess happy to take some questions or hand over back to you, Shayne.
Thanks, Alex. Just going to share my screen again and just need to get it onto the right. Okay, yeah. That's annoying because it started okay.
So while we're sorting out the technical issues, another technical issue, it turns out the chat function doesn't seem to work in this format, but we're getting some really great questions through the Q&A, and Heath is answering them. I'm answering a couple of them. So keep them coming because we're really keen to hear your thoughts and give you as much information as possible. So a couple of the questions that have come through, one of them is, why can't the laws be national? Which I would love the laws to be national. It would have saved a lot of pain and suffering in doing it state by state by state. But unfortunately, the Australian Constitution doesn't give the federal government power to deal with this issue. So that is annoying. Another question related to whether or not the Royal Flying Doctor is likely to offer VAD. Now, that's not something that we've explored, but it's an excellent point because the issue of access is really a live one, particularly in the bigger states. It's been a problem in Victoria, and that is a very small area. So that's definitely something we'll put on our list because it would be a really great thing for people that have no other access to healthcare, and it would enable them perhaps to exercise their end of life choices in their home rather than having to travel. So it looks like we've got the text sorted out.
Yep, sorry about that. Also,
Shayne can proceed.
Yeah, sorry about that muck up, but it was a good opportunity to answer some of those questions. So I just want to look at, obviously Penny and Alex have already mentioned that the when can you access assisted dying is after the 28th of November next year. It's been quite a tough time since the bill, taking calls from people who did see that the law had passed, but explaining that they can't access the law until November next year. But so I do hope, like Alex, I think that New South Wales will be one of the better places to have assisted dying when it comes into effect, but we do have to wait another 15 months. So to cover who can access, I thought it might be useful just to go back over the eligibility criteria. The person needs to be 18, an adult, 18 years or older, has to be an Australian citizen or a permanent resident and have been resident in Australia, or has been resident in Australia for at least 3 continuous years, and they must have been living in New South Wales for at least 12 months. They must have at least one disease, illness or medical condition that is advanced and progressive, and it will on the balance of probabilities, cause their death within 6 months, or for neurodegenerative diseases within, like motor neuron disease, within 12 months. And the disease or condition is causing suffering that cannot be relieved in a way that the person considers tolerable. The person must have decision-making capacity in relation to voluntary assisted dying. They must be acting voluntarily. The person must not be acting because of pressure or duress. And the request for access to voluntary assisted dying must be enduring. So the process, and obviously it's a highly safeguarded process, so we can't go through the whole detail of the bill, but in order to access this compassionate choice, the dying person themselves must make the request, so it can't be a family member or a carer or anyone else. It has to be the dying individual. The request cannot be made in an advanced care directive because the person has to maintain decision-making capacity throughout the entire process. And they have to make 3 requests. One has to be in writing, and there has to be 2 witnesses to the written request. The assessment of the criteria has to be carried out by 2 independent medical practitioners who have to have minimum requirements regarding their qualifications and their experience, and they also have to do special training, which is part of what happens, that's what the health department are working on, those training modules. All the doctors involved will be trained in recognising pressure and duress, and if they're unsure at all, they will refer to someone who has experience, such as a psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker or police, depending on the circumstances. Moving on to implementation, Penny and I have already, I'm sorry, I've just lost my place for a minute. Sorry. Yeah, Penny and I have already met with the director of the Office of the Chief Medical Officer, and since then she has passed on a summary of the progress so far. So it's early days, obviously. The implementation project team is being finalised and onboarded. The implementation committee met for the first time in late August, so we're assuming by today, and the committee reports to the Secretary of New South Wales Health and is responsible for overseeing the safe implementation of the law in New South Wales. Oh, did that move on? No. Oh, hang on. Yep. Sorry. They're working closely with their strategic communications colleagues to map out stakeholders and plan, the communications that are going to go out. The New South Wales website has already been updated, and Penny and I have had a bit of a look at that. There's some things that we need to have corrected. For instance, I noticed today that they haven't mentioned the 6 months. It just refers to the 12 months. But you know, it's so early in that's just an oversight. They're trying to keep it simple, which is sensible. But yeah, we'll obviously stay in touch with them, give them feedback, and keep our members and supporters involved and up to date as well. They started actually possibly even before the law actually passed. I think that we heard that they were in communication with the other states. So obviously it's a huge advantage, maybe not for dying individuals who want this law sooner, but overall the fact that all those other states are ahead of us. The New South Wales Health Department can learn from the other states when it comes to implementation. Where are we up to? Moving it. So preliminary discussions have occurred with partner organisations to discuss things like education and training. They're working with local health districts to determine the location of the statewide care navigator service and also the pharmacy. So obviously we know that there are already people who would like to access the law, but as I said, we've got to wait that 15 months. But there are things that can be done between now and then. If someone is facing a terminal illness, I would suggest, you know, if you want to find out general information, there's nothing stopping someone, a dying individual or their family member or carer, contacting the interstate care navigators. I had to ring the Victorian care navigators the other day, and they're obviously really incredible people, and they don't mind answering you know, general questions. Obviously the Victorian law is slightly different, but I just mean in a general sense most of the Australian laws are very similar, and until we have our own New South Wales navigation service, that's a possibility. You could potentially raise the subject with your doctor, have honest conversations obviously with your family to prepare them if this is something that you might consider. And make sure that you have the relevant documentation when it comes to medical records and also for the residency requirements, because we know from Victoria that was or has been a problem for some people. So I think I'll leave it there so that we can have plenty of time for Penny. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Shayne. Now we've been campaigning for VAD laws for 50 years, and now that a law's been passed, some people have said, well, what are you going to do with yourselves? Do you shut up shop and go on holiday? Before the law passed, in the early days after the Victorian law passed, we weren't certain what our future would be, but the experience in other states has made it absolutely clear that there is an ongoing need for Dying with Dignity to play a role in a number of areas, both in the lead up to the implementation and once it's operational. We're absolutely committed to ensuring that people understand their end of life rights and that their choices are respected, whatever those choices are. And in addition to VAD, it's just important for the community generally that people have better conversations about end of life and that they have all of their wishes expressed and written down in advanced care directives, and they appoint enduring guardians and have those important conversations with their loved ones and their doctors. So we have done and we will continue to provide resources and information to people on that. But our core role going forward is to make sure that this VAD regime works as intended, and importantly, that it's accessible to those people that need it, regardless of where they live. The experience in other states is that people in metropolitan areas have a greater ability to access VAD, and we really need to make sure that people aren't disadvantaged because of where they live. We know that there's been a crisis in rural health, and access to healthcare, access to VAD will be an issue going forward, and we're very mindful of that. We know even though a law has been passed, that at a practical level, it can be stymied in a variety of different ways. And that's been the experience in other states and overseas jurisdictions. A lot of people in the community don't even know that a VAD law has been passed, and that also goes for people in the healthcare profession. So we really need to raise awareness and provide information and resources to the public and the healthcare sector, and work with a wide range of groups involved in end-of-life care to familiarise them with the regime. There's also been a lack of doctors who are willing and trained to provide VAD, and that's been a major impediment to access in other states, like I said, particularly in rural and regional areas. We see an important role for us, with your help, to encourage the medical profession, especially GPs, to participate in the regime. Now, starting the VAD process can be very complicated and also confronting, both for the person involved, but also for their families. And they often need guidance and support, and we intend to play a role in providing that guidance and support. Shayne, do you want to just go back a bit, because I'll go into more detail on the particular things. Health and aged care facilities, where a lot of people end their lives, even though we know a lot of them prefer to die at home. That's not always possible. Some of those facilities may not be prepared to offer VAD or to allow it on their premises. And for some, that will be for religious reasons, for the ethos of the organisation. Others might just find it difficult or too controversial, and we need to work with those facilities and providers of those healthcare services to make sure that VAD is as widely accessible as possible. We also know that the opponents of VAD will continue their opposition, and they're already working to overturn or water down the regime. They're pressuring parliamentarians, but also at a practical level, we know there have been efforts to obstruct people wishing to access VAD, and that's in some instances in facilities, but also doctors who are approached by someone seeking to access VAD, trying to talk them out of it, or refusing to give them information or refer them on to someone who's prepared to participate. So we've had to really have a good hard look at what we've been doing. We've been focused on one thing for a very long time, and we've succeeded with that one thing. It has taken 50 years, but we're here now. We've spent the last couple of months considering how we can best meet our key aim of ensuring access to VAD. We've developed a new strategic plan which has 4 key pillars. So we've summarised those as support, educate, engage, and defend. So in terms of support, we hope that we will be able to offer support and advice to people with a terminal illness and their families. Oh, Shayne, can you go back one slide? Education, both of the public and the healthcare profession and other stakeholders, about VAD and end-of-life issues generally. Engage means working with those involved in the implementation phase and doctors groups, and to defend the law against those that would seek to deny compassionate end-of-life rights. So going on to a little bit more detail. So next slide, please, Shayne. Like I said, people often come to end of life with very little knowledge about what lies ahead of them, and it can be a frightening and disempowering experience. We already take a number of phone calls from people in difficult circumstances. Some of them we're able to refer on to people who can help them. Often that's palliative care, sometimes it's legal advice. We're going to prepare detailed resources of organisations and places where people can go and get expert support, but we're also proposing to offer some ability to talk to people at Dying with Dignity. All of us have had experience with end of life ourselves, and we're very familiar with the issues. And this has been the case in Victoria, where they've given a great deal of support and help to people and referred them to particularly the VAD navigators to allow them to get the help that they need and the expertise that they need. And we're also hoping to get contact details for doctors who might participate in VAD, palliative care, regardless of whether someone proceeds with VAD or not. Palliative care is just such a critical resource for people at the end of their lives, and we will be hoping to build good relationships with that sector. We did a lot of seminars during our campaign, and we plan to continue to provide information through webinars, our website, newsletters and brochures. So you will be seeing regular communications from us. We'll be keeping people up to date on the implementation, but also general information about end of life. And then after the regime is implemented, we'll be hoping to give people guidance on a range of aspects of the VAD regime. We had great success during our campaign with our regional pods, and we hope to continue that regional structure. It has proved in Victoria that having that support and having that local support has been very important. We've had a group in the Central Coast for over 25 years, and that's a well-functioning, well-organised group. And if we can replicate that in other parts of the state, I think that would be very helpful for people who need someone to speak to locally, but also for advocacy with local organisations and particularly healthcare facilities. So moving on to our education piece. Education generally to as many people involved in healthcare and end-of-life care. There's a lot of organisations who may not have thought about VAD, and others who won't want to participate in it, but they still need to understand what their obligations are. And that will help both them and also people under their care. We're hoping to build relationships with various medical bodies, particularly the GPs, but others who oncology and neurology, particularly for people with the neurodegenerative illnesses, to make sure that their practitioners understand about VAD. And the more of them that we can get signed up to do the training and be prepared to offer VAD, the better access will be available to those who need it. We'll be collaborating. We did a lot of relationship building during our campaign. We've got great relationships with groups like Cancer Voices. We've contacted some of the education providers, the medical colleges, Nurses Association, the Health Services Union, and we hope to build on and continue those relationships. So like I said earlier, we'll be providing lots of education opportunities and events to educate both the public and people with terminal illnesses and their families, and also the healthcare sector. So our next slide, please, Shayne. So engaging, we hope to have a close relationship with New South Wales Health, and our experience to date has been terrific, very encouraging. The people we've spoken to indicate that they're right on top of what they need to do. They're already forging ahead, and they have a hard date to work to. It's not like a project that often happens in bureaucracies where things can meander on indefinitely. They have to have this ready by the end of November next year, and everything we've seen indicates that they will be ready, and they understand that they need to be ready well before the regime begins so that people can start using it as early as possible. The other thing to note is that we understand that those involved in the implementation are personally supportive of VAD. So we have a strong level of confidence that there won't be, as we've seen in some other states, some attempts to throw bureaucratic thumbtacks in the road. We're feeling comfortable the way things are going, and they've indicated that they will work collaboratively with us and also other groups that will be participating. Once the regime is in place, we expect that there will be some issues, and we will be making sure that we keep on top of people's experience and collecting personal stories so that we can compile data for the review of the law, which will happen in Parliament. I think it's 2 years after the law's passed, or maybe 2 years after implementation. But we need to get real practical information from people that are using the scheme and practitioners to see where the issues are and how they can be smoothed out, and any enhancements to the law. Particularly, ideally, we would like a nationally consistent law. So we'll be working with other states to see where their issues are, and to the extent that we can, in a clunky state-by-state situation, to try and get the most consistent regime. Particularly, firstly, it makes sense, because why would you have potentially 8 different laws, which are all slightly different? We want consistency for that purpose, but also medical groups that work across the country, we want them to have the same regime to work with. And like I said, we'll be seeking to strengthen relationships with our VAD Alliance members and as many other groups as we possibly can. And that includes groups who have previously been opposed to VAD, some of the Catholic and other religious providers. We will try as hard as we can to connect with them and hope to, if not convince them to offer VAD in their facilities, at least work with them to make sure that those that they can't help are not disadvantaged, or in some instances, actively damaged in their medical care. We know this is a terrible story, but we know stories from Canada of people in a religious facility who had to be taken in a wheelchair out to a bus shelter in the street to have a consultation with a doctor about VAD, and that serves no one's interests, and we would hope that that won't be the experience here. Moving on to defending the law. Shayne, if you can pop up the next. So like I said, we expect to have to defend this law, and eternal vigilance will be something we will have to maintain. That will involve monitoring the opponent's activities and trying to counter that. We will continue to lobby MPs to make sure that our parliaments remain firm on VAD. We've managed to get a very strong media and political presence during our campaign. We've got good relationships with the media and with a lot of MPs, not just in New South Wales, but around the country. And we will continue to build on those and make sure that they stand firm. Again, VAD in religious health and aged care facilities is something that we absolutely have to monitor. And we'll also work with the interstate DWDs and other advocacy groups to make sure that we're all pushing together to make sure that these laws that we've fought so hard for are not damaged or overturned. We've got a lot of work to do, but we're really motivated by these new challenges. It will involve a different way of doing things, and we'll have to learn to change our modus operandi in some respects, but we'll continue our historical way of dealing with people. We will talk to anyone, even if they don't agree with us. So there will be a continuation of our approach of respectful dialogue, effective partnering, and maintaining and developing our wonderful DWD community. You are our most important asset, and you will continue to be as we try and make this VAD regime as strong and effective as possible. And you can rest assured that we will continue to fight for your rights to control your end-of-life choices. It's a really exciting and important time for us. We've all had a bit of a rest. We're still a little bit shell-shocked from the political process, but you can rest assured that we're committed to continuing this work. Now, I haven't been keeping track of the questions, so maybe if Heath, who has been scanning them and responding to a lot of them, can see if there's anything that has popped up since I last spoke on the questions.
Look, there's so many fantastic questions. It's been quite lively over here. Julie Sankey's actually questioned that she's interested in being involved in forming an educational regional group on south coast of New South Wales. So anybody that might be interested in doing something in a regional remote area, send Shayne an email. So it's shayne@dwdnsw.org.au. I'm just going to head back up because there are a couple of really fantastic questions here. So Jackie's asked, concern for rural areas to have some facilities. What assurances for equal treatment will be in place?
There is a provision, it's a statement of intent in the Act that all people in New South Wales should have the same access to VAD. Now, obviously, they've made the same assurances about healthcare generally, and it's been difficult to achieve. That is one area where regional advocacy from our community will be very important. The continued hassling of members of parliament is always a good way to proceed, but also local media and those on the ground discussions with healthcare providers and facilities. I think that will be really important. And we will continue to lobby for the rights of people in regional and remote areas.
And Graham's asking, can preparation for a request precede November 28, 2023?
Well, as I said before, I think there are certain things you can do, but you definitely can't, formally start the process, but having those conversations, work out perhaps if your doctor is willing to do the training. If you have a terminal illness, you feel that you will be eligible, the sooner you find a doctor willing to do the training, the better. And obviously, if it's one of the doctors that you're familiar with, I think that's a very good idea, finding those documents, etc. So I don't think there's anything that prevents the conversations and that groundwork, but you can't make your first formal request until the 28th of November.
Yeah, from our discussions with the health department, they do seem to be aware that people will want to get prepared in advance and that they will need to have their materials ready, and hopefully that includes the training materials for doctors and all the various forms and things that are needed. So we would expect to be, during the course of next year, building some guidance and resources for people who think that they might be eligible or interested in pursuing VAD. So we'll do as much as we can to help you prepare for it, but we're not in a position to give any exact idea as to what you'll be able to do in advance. One thing in terms of getting doctors involved, we do plan to prepare some materials for our supporters to take to their own doctors to firstly let the doctors know that the VAD law exists, but also that their patients are likely to want it. And we'll give you some cheat sheets on how you might raise it with your doctor and how you might encourage them to do the training so that they're prepared for their patients to ask those questions and to offer VAD. There's a very good group of doctors in Victoria who are setting up a support network for other doctors across Australia and New Zealand. So there are parts of the profession that are really getting themselves organised to make sure that they can provide that support and that they're supporting each other and sharing their knowledge and experience.
I'd also like to answer, there's so many good questions, so I hope that there's a way of permanently recording these. But Janet Cohen asked, will the views of VAD potential service users be canvassed by the Department of Health? We do believe that there will be some community consultation or a consumer group, and I've already thought of a few people to suggest. So if there is anyone there on watching today who may feel that they will be eligible and would like to also be included in some consultation, again, email me at Dying with Dignity, so that when if we get asked, we can pass on your name. And Murray also asked about under what circumstances would the police be involved, because I did mention that if a doctor suspects that someone is being pressured or under duress, that they could refer to a psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker or police. I imagine that the police it'd have to be a very extreme case, but as the Act does specify, there are harsh penalties for anyone who is found, guilty of pressuring someone to access VAD. So I don't think I don't think it would happen. I hope, let's hope not. But obviously the psychiatrist, psychologist would be, the more likely one, but there is, it is part of the law that there'll be a criminal offence. So yeah, we'd need to look at the details of that.
One fun little question. I realise we are drawing close to six o'clock. Sue's asking a different type of question. Will DWD be having a celebratory event so we can meet the committee and thank them in person?
Well, that's a good question, because obviously COVID has really sort of made that very difficult. It would have been great to be able to celebrate in May, but there were restrictions. And as you know, many of our members and supporters and people who rallied are definitely in the vulnerable category. But we have flagged it as a possibility, maybe in the summer months, maybe outside, but we haven't made a definite arrangement. But we'll wait for Penny to come back from her European holiday and discuss it again. So it's a maybe at this stage, but certainly we would obviously let everyone know, because yes, it would be lovely to get together and celebrate.
I think I will just comment that we have had some really fantastic questions, and if anybody's missed any responses to them, don't panic. It's all in our strategy, it is all in our future plans, and we will certainly have more information and resources to come to you in the future.
Okay, we're right on time, so why don't I just finish up? So there will be other opportunities for you to ask questions, and we are committed to giving you as much information as we possibly can, and to the extent that we know it, how things are going with the implementation. So I just wanted to thank everyone for coming along. We'll circulate the recording to everyone who RSVP'd and attended, so you can forward it on to any family and friends who might be interested, and we'll also put it on our YouTube site and our website. Like I said, we'll be having more sessions, so this is the beginning, not the end.
And could I also add, Penny, seeing that there were 65 questions in total, and I know Heath answered 42 of them when we were doing our presentations, but it may be, if you want to send your questions, perhaps another webinar in the future would be more a sort of an answering your questions that are sent in ahead of time. I don't think anyone did send any questions before, but we obviously had a lot of information that we wanted to get put forward at this stage. So yeah, I don't know what Penny and Heath think, but I think that answering those important questions that we mightn't have thought of is worthwhile thing to do.
Absolutely, and they do help inform the resources that we're going to generate, because you're not the only person that's going to have that question. So it is vital that we hear them.
Yeah, and I think, obviously we're planning a frequently asked questions page on our website, and I see that as something that is going to grow into a very lengthy document, because I'm quite sure there will be a lot of questions that people have that we haven't thought of. So we'll try and do a big compilation, and we're always happy to receive emails with questions. And as time gets closer to the implementation, we are looking at how we might resource a support line and get some training for some of our board members and others, so that we can provide as much help and support as possible. Obviously, we can't give medical or legal advice, but sometimes just having someone to speak to who understands your situation, I think that can often be of great comfort. And we hope that we've been able to provide that to people in the past, and we certainly want to do that in the future. So in closing, I want to thank you all for such wonderful support over such a long time. And as others have said earlier, this bill would not have passed without the efforts of our supporters and the community. So yes, we've been hard at work, but it is really the result of your efforts and support that we're in the position we're in now. I have to ask one favour, which is that the Territories Bill is on its way through federal parliament, and those of you that have followed this closely, it's been 25 years since the Territories were effectively banned from passing VAD laws, and the new government had committed to bring a law in to overturn that, so that the ACT and Northern Territory can exercise their democratic rights to debate and hopefully pass their own VAD laws. A bill was put forward pretty quickly, private members bill, and a charged through the House of Representatives with a massive majority. I think it was 99 votes to 36 or thereabouts. It's coming before the Senate, and it may be in the first week of September. So our supporters have been just marvellous in contacting New South Wales MPs for our campaign, and we really need to help the Territories. So we will be circulating another link asking our supporters to contact their New South Wales senators and ask them to vote for the Territories Bill. Hopefully we can remedy this failure of democracy that's gone on for a quarter of a century. And it would be a tragedy for the small numbers of people in the Northern Territory and the ACT if they were denied the same end of life rights that the rest of us now have. So thank you, everyone. We hope to see you soon. And any questions, please just keep asking them, and we'll keep building our frequently asked questions resource. So look forward to seeing you soon.